Okay, I'm recording now this video to demonstrate the assembly instructions for this direction finder antenna. I had to break it down in order to make it small enough to fit in a standard box to send to Nigeria. This is what the antenna looks like as it's broken down. It's not completely disassembled. I just wanted to get it small enough to fit in the box. So it's basically folded up like a pair of scissors here, and you can see how it's how the arms are moving, and that's about as small as it can get, and that's how I'm going to ship it. I'm going to ship it in a box that's big enough to hold that. The arms can be moved actually in the opposite direction also, but that's not safe because it'll tend to snag and it'll rip up some of the cables. So for that reason, I put some markings here saying scissors, which means that this is where the thing should be folded up on this side and not on the opposite side. Okay, don't fold it this way, fold it that way, in case you ever have to fold it up again. But anyway, that's what it looks like. And I'm going to assemble it in this video and show exactly how it's done. Essentially, there's one more piece that has to be installed. And this is it. And this will get installed onto these two pieces. And this will secure these two pieces when they're at right angles. So that's all for the beginning, and that's how this looks. So I'll show the next one. Next sequence, I'll show you how it looks when it's ready to install that third piece. Okay, this is a view from the other end, or from one end, and I'm going to unfold the arms now. And this is where they will be in their final position, and they're oriented at right angles. I'll get up above a little bit and show that a little bit more clearly. Now, these arms are loose. They're secured with a single bolt, which is not tightened down. That's not so important. But what I want to point out is there are two areas here with some cross-hatching drawn on the aluminum. There's one there, and there's one here, and that's where the bracket is going to go. And on the bracket, you will see that there are cross-hatched areas on the bracket also, and these cross-hatched areas should mate up with the cross-hatched areas on the two arms. Okay, so when this thing is installed properly, those cross-hatches will mate up with these cross-hatches. Right now this antenna is sitting upside down, and there are markings on this antenna to indicate which way is up. I'm going to turn it right side up and show you that in the next sequence of video. Okay, now the antenna is turned right side up. You can see the cross-hatched areas again, where this vertical strut is going to be mounted. Okay. On the vertical strut, you'll see there's a label that says up, and then the arms are labeled. This one is the north end of the antenna. This is the south end of the antenna. This is the west end of the antenna. And this is the east end of the antenna. And on the crosshatch area here, you can see there's labels. This is the north arm. This is the south arm. This is the west arm. And this is the east arm. So there's plenty of information written on this antenna. All of these labels are covered up with transparent tape, so they're not going to get washed away or rubbed away in weather. So they should be fairly durable. And so that's where the brace is going to go. There's a hole here for one bolt and a hole here for another bolt. And when that brace is installed, these two arms will be fully immobilized, and they'll be rigidly secured to each other. There's a third bolt that you could tighten up if you wish, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it loose. And that's where the arm is going to go. And on the arm, you can see also there's a notation of north-south and east-west. And this north-south face is going to mate up with this north-south face. And this east-west face, which is this portion here, this face is going to mate up with this east-west face. And it's going to fit in just like that. Now there's 4 bolts on here. 2 of them are secured. 2 of them are loose right now. The 2 that are loose are the ones that you need to install onto the main antenna. And I'm going to remove these bolts, and in the next video sequence, I'm going to install the bolts one at a time and show you how they're done. That's it. Okay, here's the mounting strut, which when it's installed, it'll become exactly vertical as it's shown here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this before I get to the actual installation. This is the method. This is the device that will actually mate with the vertical mast that the antenna is going to be mounted on. There are 4 bolts on it. 2 of them are actually dead bolts that don't actually do anything. All they're really there for is to mate with a circular mast better than would happen otherwise, so that it doesn't rattle around and it isn't loose. And I don't have a vertical mast here, but I do have a vertical mailing tube like this. And I'll show you what I mean. Right now I've just got 2 bolts on there. And as you can see, it's loose and it kind of wobbles around. So even if I try to clamp this down to the mast, it really wouldn't. It would be a pretty lousy fit. And you know, it would be pretty obviously cockeyed, you know, when you look up at it. And so I figured I may as well fix that. I need to put 4 bolts on here in order to prevent that from happening. So that's why you've got 2 extra bolts here that don't really do anything. They're just there to prevent this thing from wobbling around. Okay, these are the 2 bolts that I removed. These are 1/4 bolts by 1 1/4 inches long, hex heads. Followed below that by some flat washers, then some lock washers, and some nuts. This stuff is all stainless, so it's not going to rust in the rain. And I'm going to put those on next. When these things are installed, you're going to need some 7/16 inch wrenches, and I'm going to provide you with some wrenches. These are 7/16 inch combination wrenches. They've got a box wrench on one end and an open end wrench on the other. And these will mate with both the hex head on the bolt and with the nuts. Okay, and you're going to need 2 of them because you're going to have to grab the nut with one wrench and grab the bolt with the other and tighten them against each other when you put this on the antenna. So I'll give you these wrenches. I'm going to include these with everything else when I ship it. I'm also going to include some hose clamps, which are used to actually secure the antenna to the mast. These are the hose clamps I'm talking about. I've got some small ones here if you've got a relatively small diameter mast. I've also got some big ones if you've got a bigger diameter mast. And these are basically, you tighten these up by, you know, turning this screw here, and it will actually act like a worm drive, and it will actually reduce the circumference and the diameter of this until it clamps down on the mast. Probably you can use this one here. Okay, I widened this one up a little bit. These small ones have got some thumb wheel mechanisms, so you can tighten them up or loosen them up by turning this knob. And you have to turn it to like 10 or 15 turns in order to get it small enough. But anyway, these slip over the bracket like this, one on the bottom, and one on the top, and one on the bottom. And then as you tighten this screw up, it will actually clamp down onto the mast and hold everything immobilized and hold it vertical. So that's what the hose clamps are for, is to hold everything together and hold it tight and hold it onto the mast. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention is regarding these clamps. Um, they're normally provided like this, and you would normally slip these down over the mast and over the edge of the clamp in order to secure the DF antenna to the mast. But that may not be practical because there might be some obstructions on the mast higher up that won't allow this thing to be loaded from the top, or it may just be too far to reach all the way up to the mast to put this thing on. If you operate this set screw mechanism and you untighten this thing, if you loosen this thing up to its full extent, you'll find that you can actually get it to the point where you actually decouple the two elements of the mast from each other like this, and that will allow you to actually slip this thing over the mast, and then without having to go all the way up to the top of the mast or all the way down to the bottom. So if you run into a problem where you need to do that, you can do that with these hose clamps. You can completely disconnect them from each other, disconnect the two ends, slip it over the mast, and then reconnect the two ends, and then tighten down these thumb screws again, and it'll bite, and the worm gear drive will re-engage, and you'll be able to tighten it down. So I just want to point that out in case you need to do that. Okay, just about ready to install the mounting strut. So looking at the crotch there's the cross hatches where the mounting strut is going to mate up. The antenna is actually pointing right side up right now. So I'm going to install the top bolt first on the north-south arm, and we'll get to it. Okay, there's the first bolt installed, but it's not tightened up. It's still loose, as you can see. There's the hex head on this side, and on the back side, you've got the hex nut, the lock washer, and the flat washer. I'm going to go ahead and tighten these up. I'll still leave them a little bit loose because I got one more bolt that I've got to install. So once I've got both bolts installed and the nuts are down finger tight, I'll go ahead and tighten them up with a wrench. So that's next. Okay, so both bolts are now installed and they're finger tight. The top one I've already got tightened up. I left the two wrenches there so you can see how they're acting against the other. One is on the near side of the north-south arm. The other one's on the far side. And you have to tighten those two wrenches up against each other in order to tighten up the nut. I'll do the same thing on the other screw and nut, and that will finally completely immobilize this thing, and this whole thing will be rigid and sturdy and solid. Okay, both bolts are now tightened up, and everything is very rigid and solid. I'm not able to make anything wiggle or move, so it's ready to proceed to the next step, and the next step would be to probably put the antenna on, but I'm going to describe some of the other stuff first. Okay, at this point, the mounting strut has been installed on the cross arms and secured, and this is probably the best time to actually take this antenna and install it on the mast with the hose clamps. There's still more assembly work to be done on it, but this is probably the best time to put it on the mast because it'll be a lot easier to do it when you don't have a bunch of cables attached to it. So that's what I would recommend at this point. And the mast itself is actually going to go right in this vertical element here. It's going to fit into it, and the hose clamps will go over the vertical element, the mounting bracket there, and hold the mast to the vertical element, and that's what will secure the antenna. When you install the antenna on the mast, it isn't necessary to actually point the antenna in any particular direction. The display unit has got controls on it which will allow you to electrically rotate the antenna at the display so that you can make the antenna appear to be pointing in virtually any direction you want. So there's no real need to worry about pointing the antenna in the correct direction. So just put it in whatever direction is convenient for you, and then go ahead and finish the assembly. Once the antenna is installed on the mast, there's still more work to be done. The two antenna cables have to be installed onto the summing box, which is there. Or, yeah, this guy. And they install on the bottom there. And then once that's installed and the cables are secured to the mast with tie wraps, the last thing to be done is that the antenna elements have to be installed on each one of these arms. And the antenna elements are basically just wire pieces of rigid wire that point up and down, and they thread into the connectors on the top and the bottom of these plastic boxes. And I'll describe that in greater detail in a later video. But at this point, it's time to put this thing on the mast and secure it. So that's it. Once this mounting bracket is installed and it's secured and everything is tightened up, then it's time to put this whole assembly on the mast and tie it down with hose clamps. And then you can go on to finishing it. Okay. This box contains the antenna cables. There's two of them. There's one a coaxial cable for the signal and one control cable to turn on the various antennas. So this will all be shipped in a separate box when it's shipped to you, but this is what it looks like right now. These are the antenna elements. There's 8 of them, 2 of them installed on each arm. I'll show that in a minute. Here's the 2 antenna cables. Coaxial cable is terminated at both ends in a UHF connector, and then it goes into an adapter that goes down to a BNC, and both ends are identical, so it doesn't matter which end you plug into the antenna. Okay, there's the antenna cable plugged in, and the antenna right now is turned upside down. This cable would normally be running down, but that's where it goes and that's how it plugs in. This is a BNC connector, so it's like a quarter turn lock and unlock. So I'm going to unlock it now and then just pull it out. Second connector on here is a DB9 male connector. It's got 9 pins that are male pins. And I'll show you. That's going to mate with the antenna control cable. And I'll show you that next. Okay, there's the antenna cable, a control cable. And it's got a couple of DB9 connectors. One is a DB9 male. The other is a DB9 female. The one that you want to run up. Sorry, turned the camera off accidentally. The one that you want to run up to the antenna is the DB9 female. Don't get them confused, because you don't want to get everything nailed down and then discover you got the wrong end up with the antenna. And I'll make that up next and show that to you. Okay. There's the antenna cable with the 2 ends unmated. The connector on the top is the DB9 female. That's the one that's got to go up to the antenna on the mast. The bottom one is the DB9 male, and that's the one that's got to go into the display unit down at the bottom. And so don't mix those two up when you install this cable. Otherwise, you'll discover you'll just have to take the cable apart and turn everything around and do it again. So I'll put this on now and show you how it hooks up. Okay. If you look at the connector here, you'll see on either side there are some threaded standoffs. Those will mate with screws on the mating connector, and they provide a mechanism that allows you to lock the two together so they won't accidentally disconnect from each other. That secures the two connectors together so that they're you can trust them. Okay, I'm going to put the mating connector on now. Okay, there's the mating connector installed. And if you'll notice on the sides, one side and the other, you have these thumb screws, which you can rotate down, and it drives some screw threads into those mating standoffs. And they've even put some slots on the top, so if you really want to tighten it down, you can tighten it down with a screwdriver. And once they're tight, you can't pull this out for love or money. It's going to be on there. So that's what those things are for, and that's how you secure these two connectors to each other, and so you've got a reliable connection that's not going to fall apart. Okay, this should be the last segment of the video describing the installation of the direction finding antenna. The final step of this process is to actually install the antenna elements, and here's one. These rods are about 18 inches long. The connectors on the end of it is a UHF type connector, and the rods are actually phosphor bronze brazing rods, so they're rigid and stiff, and they're covered with shrink sleeving in order to help protect them from the elements and from rain and from rust and whatever corrosion might happen. These are also potted to help prevent any rain or water penetration into the interior of the connector with a material called JB weld, which is fairly common in the U.S. So these are pretty sturdy gadgets, and there's 8 of these things total. I use 2 of them on the end of each arm, and they mate with these connectors. There's one on the top and one on the bottom, and you basically just put them on and thread them in, and just like that. And these things usually, to really get them tight, you need to grab these with some pliers. These are actually considered kind of low-grade connectors. They were very popular during the World War II, but they're pretty much these days they're only used by people that are trying to avoid spending a lot of money on more expensive connectors. But in this case, they actually serve the purpose very well. So I mention that because these threads are actually not very tight, and no matter how hard you tighten them down. And since this is going to be outside, it's going to be exposed to sunshine, and it's going to heat up during the day and cool off at night, which is going to cause everything to expand and contract, and it'll happen every time the sun rises again. And it's actually possible after several weeks and even months for these things to actually loosen themselves up. And so it's like you can actually hear it rattling. And that's not a problem for the upper antenna elements, but for the lower antenna elements, if this thing completely decouples because of gravity, it's actually possible for these elements to fall off. Okay? So, to prevent that, I don't really trust the threads on these connectors very much. So I'm going to include a tube of some sealing agent called Loctite. And this is basically a chemical agent which acts like a kind of a sticky glue, and it's applied to the threads on the connectors just before these things are assembled. Okay? And what happens is that once the connector is tightened up, the glue will basically cure, and it will prevent these threads from accidentally becoming unthreaded due to thermal expansion and so on and so forth. So that should be definitely done on the lower elements, the lower connectors here. So I recommend that strongly. So anyway, this is the material. This is actually fairly common stuff. It's probably available, everywhere else in the world. This particular one, there's different varieties of these things. This one is called Blue 242, and this is what is called a removable adhesive, which means that it will hold, when it cures, it'll be sticky enough to hold the threads and prevent them from accidentally unthreading. But it's not so strong that it's impossible to remove the connector. In other words, if you have some reason where you need to remove this connector, even though it's got this adhesive on there, if you try hard enough, you'll actually be able to break the adhesive and you'll still be able to remove this connector like this. Okay, so it's this particular one is made for that purpose. Anyway, that's pretty much it. And you put all 8 of these antennas on, and then I'm going to put all these 8 of these elements on, and then just have a few more seconds to show you what it looks like, and that should be the end of this presentation. So here we go. Okay, this is a pretty crude way to demonstrate it, but this is what it looks like. See if I can step it back a little bit, get a little bit of distance. And when it's all assembled and it's all there, some of the antenna elements are a little bent. You can bend those back by hand. So I dropped this thing a couple of times and bent some of the elements. But that's the general idea. That's what it looks like when it's finished and it's mounted on a mast. So there you go.